Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar discussion video. In this one I want to do some speculation on what I think the third Avatar one-shot comic, what character they're going to focus on. So the reason I'm doing this video is because fairly recently we got some new information about this, about the one-shot that basically I think gave us a way to kind of figure out who the character is going to be. So Rachel Roberts on the Dark Horse stream last week, I guess, mentioned that it's a trilogy of one-shots and that it's a themed trilogy. And she said for this initial group of one-shots that the theme was the awesome ladies of Avatar. And that definitely fits. So obviously starting off with Katara and the Pirate Silver, the next one coming out in February, of course, is going to be Toph Beifong's Metal Bending Academy, meaning we have a third one-shot confirmed, but also that the focus character is going to be a female character. So that's actually quite interesting, and it kind of, I think, really helps us to figure stuff out, because I think after the first two, without knowing the theme, I was definitely leaning in the direction of like Sokka. I think it kind of has to be Sokka almost, you know, unless they're going to do Aang or Zuko, but it almost feels like, you know, they've been the main characters of so many of the comics that it's maybe not what the path they want to go down. So who's it going to be? But now we know it's going to be one of the female characters as the focus. So I have a bit of a kind of short list of characters I think they're going to do here. So let's sort of go through them. Obviously some of these candidates are much more likely to happen than others. So real quickly, the short list I have is Sookie, Azula, Mai, Ty Lee, Yue, Kyoshi, Yang Chen, Kana, and Ursa. I think characters beyond that I think are getting way too far into the minor character category, that I don't think they're very likely to put out. You know, the character who they choose is going to have to be the center focus of a comic that has to sell to Avatar fans, both casual and hardcore. So as much as the fans might really like, you know, Jin as a character, can you really imagine them putting out like a full 72-page comic with like Jin front and center on the cover? Not quite. It's one of those unfortunate things that they can't really do that, but you know, we have to be realistic here. So let's run through some of these. I suppose I'll go in a little bit of a reverse order here, because like obviously some of the characters like Sookie, Mai, Ty Lee are much more likely than others. So Ursa I think is a candidate because she's already had a big focus book in The Search, but also some elements of Smoke and Shadow. And so she's a character we know quite a bit about. And there's room over her history to tell some more stories for sure. But it might be a case where, like Azula, she's almost like locked off, focused on the mainline story, in that I kind of feel like the next time we're going to get Ursa focus will be the next time we get Azula focus, because those two have to communicate at some point. I still think, you know, there's maybe a slight chance that it happens, because there's a lot more sort of interest in the character post The Search, and especially Smoke and Shadow. But what sort of story do you exactly tell? I don't really feel they're going to do that, but you know, it's at the very least, you know, you have to consider it. Kana, or you know, aka Gran, again, is an option. Like, she is a character who has a history that we know at least some of it. You know, the potential to tell a story when she was younger is definitely there. You could frame it with her telling it to, you know, Katara or something like that. And you know, tell a story from pretty much anywhere in her life that will delve into the history of the Water Tribe. But again, you know, I think with Kana perhaps it's a case of like, would the book sell if you have Gran on the cover as the focus character from a marketing point of view? I'm not quite sure. Then we get into the two avatars I mentioned there. So we obviously have Yang Chen and Kyoshi. I think there's no real problem selling it, because I think everyone is like hyped about all of the avatars, and just knowing that, oh, you're going to tell a story about one of the other avatars, that's really cool. Especially Kyoshi is now super popular because of the books, and she still has tons of room for development depending on where you choose to set that story. everyone would love that, especially if you allowed some of the other characters from the Kyoshi novels to make their sort of comic debut. So we got more art for like Rangi and so on. That would be very, very cool to see. But is it a little bit too close? Would they do that necessarily? As much as, yes, Kyoshi technically is an Avatar The Last Airbender character, is it really the way they want to go, in the sense of, you know, when they collect these 3 books together into a hardcover at some point, your cover is going to have to be like some weird dynamic of Katara, Toph, okay, makes sense, and Kyoshi and Yang Chen. Not quite sure about that. So that is perhaps what I feel almost eliminates both Kyoshi and Yang Chen. Even though as avatars, I think they would definitely fit the bill of being like a notable enough of a character to do it, and they have obviously very interesting, you know, histories to work with there. Princess Yue, you know, she was, you know, a pretty focused on character for at least a handful of episodes, and, you know, she's the moon now, of course, so there's ways to tell stories. Like, I think you could tell a pretty interesting, more spirit-focused story about like what she's up to now, like what it's like being a spirit. But you could also tell flashback stuff of her when she was younger. Again, I don't know, she might be a little bit too, you know, focused specifically on those individual episodes to make her the focus, but, you know, again, one of the other, you know, female characters, you did get a decent amount of focus in those episodes. But yeah, definitely the last 4 here, I think, are the ones where there's the most option to actually do it. I suppose for me, since we're going in sort of reverse order, the character I'd kind of eliminate first would probably be Azula, unfortunately. Even though, like, I suppose Katara, Toph, and Azula definitely would be sort of the top tier in terms of just raw popularity of, like, female characters. Azula would definitely fit that bill. I don't think there's any problem marketing a book on the basis of Azula being the focus. The problem here is that I don't think they are going to go back to Azula, because if they tell an Azula story, there's immediately going to be a demand for it to be the continuation post Smoke and Shadow, which I obviously, as part of the announcement that, you know, these are a trilogy of one-shots, also came the announcement that, at least for the time being, they've sort of put super advancing the story into the future of Avatar comics on hold. So anything post on Imbalance is on hold. So unless you're going to tell a backstory thing with Azula, I don't really think she is going to be who they focus on. Not to mention, we sort of know Faith Erin Hicks is a little worried about writing the character. And if these are going to be lighter stories with not as important stuff going on, I can't really see her wanting to tackle Azula, even if it is Azula in a more, you know, less important story. Which I think leaves the 3 really, really clear candidates for, yeah, it could be pretty much any of these 3. So unfortunately, I think probably Ty Lee is perhaps maybe the least likely. Again, maybe from the perspective of, you know, okay, Katara, Toph, and Ty Lee, it kind of works, but you'd almost associate May as being the one sort of more interlinked into Team Avatar, sort of through the Zuko connection. And while, of course, Ty Lee is involved there as well, sort of through Sookie, I suppose primarily, and May, she still feels like maybe a little bit more on the outside if you're planning your grouping of 3 characters that well. If you do decide to tell a Ty Lee story, you have lots of options. Backstory stuff that relates to, you know, her sisters, you know, all of the identical sisters, which of course we've seen before in the Sisters Free Comic Book Day book. That could be very interesting. And there's loads of little gaps, I suppose, during the show to actually tell stuff with these. And this links into, like, May as well. What if they, kind of like Katara and the Pirate Silver, told, like, a kind of untold tale adventure that Ozai's Angels potentially got up to, where maybe Azula's in it like a tiny bit, but she maybe sends May and Ty Lee off on a mission, and you allow it to be sort of the focus on both of them. Perhaps they don't encounter Team Avatar, but more have to do something on their own. That could be a really cool way to get these 2 characters into play. Other thing you could do here is if you're setting it during the comic timeline, of course, focusing on Ty Lee would allow you to explore her dynamic with the other Kyoshi warriors, her teaching people chi blocking, and just the general, situation that's going on here. Again, like there is options, but I think we have to move on to May as like the character who is probably, I'd say, the second most likely to get the announcement as the third character of this one-shot trilogy. With May, you have that combination of being able to do much of the same stuff that you can do with Ty Lee, but then also, I think the stuff that happens with her in the comics is also really, really interesting grounds to develop the characters a little bit more. In terms of, if you want to go to lighter story, you can still kind of develop her relationship with Zuko, because everyone is just kind of like, can we please just have these two characters get back together? Why have they been broken up for so long? That's something they can go back to, and that seems like one of those things where, like, it's basically ready to happen post Smoke and Shadow. We just need to see the characters interact again. Can't it just happen off screen? This would be a nice way to do it. But, there's that. There's her relationship with her mother, her relationship with her father to go off. Tom Tom as well. As I said, the dynamic between her and Ty Lee, the dynamic with her and Zuko. And yeah, like I said, you can set stories with both May and Ty Lee during the show if you want to go back in. And even with May, and Ty Lee both, you could actually potentially do a full backstory if you really wanted to. Focus on those characters when they're even younger. Another, dynamic that happened. But the character who feels the most like clear cut and obvious, I think, is Sookie. And I think this is going to be a very telling announcement when it finally happens, because it feels all but set up for Sookie to finally get her chance in the spotlight. Because there's been an interesting dynamic with the fandom, and I suppose how Sookie is sort of viewed by the actual creators, in that typically what ends up happening is that, oh, like, here's a cool new shot of all of Team Avatar, and then everyone's like, are you forgetting someone? Like, where's Sookie? Like, Sookie was included in the montage at the start of Legend of Korra, that she is a member of Team Avatar. We all consider her a member of Team Avatar because she was part of the group at the end of the series. And while she, has her own stuff going on, as we've seen in the comics, being a Kyoshi warrior, then being sort of Zuko's bodyguard, which perhaps seems to have passed at this point, she is still fundamentally a member of the team. And she's also in a relationship with Sokka, so there's even more of a connection with her with the team. And there's so much ground to work with, in the sense of Sookie fits perfectly, because if you're going for the theme of the Awesome Ladies of Avatar, what better trio is there than Katara, Toph, and Sookie as the female members of Team Avatar? You almost feel like the Library Edition cover makes itself. Just a fun cover image featuring these three characters. And then, like I said, I think there's the most potential here for stories, in that a lot of people are probably going to want it to be set somewhere in the comic timeline, because I think we just in general want content to be placed there. And that's definitely grounds to tell some stories, like more incidents that she got up to when, like, she was Zuko's bodyguard. But I think almost more interesting than that is, if you tell stories with Sookie during the show, you're actually going to be covering some very interesting ground, because Sookie, for most of the show, wasn't a member of Team Avatar and was pretty separate to them in the grand scheme of things, in that her debut is obviously 104, Warriors of Kyoshi. Then Team Avatar leaves, but when we're told about Sookie again, it's that she's left Kyoshi Island to basically, help out in the war. The team inspired her, and obviously we find her again in the Serpent's Pass, where she reunites with the team and helps them on their way, of course. But then they sort of go their separate ways again, and then we see Sookie in Appa's Lost Days, which is when she's captured by Azula. And then Boiling Rock is when we see her once more. So there's a lot of, like, she makes an appearance and then is gone for a while. So many options to tell a story in all of these spots. Cover the gap between 104 and 212. Her making the decision to leave, what she does on the way to, participating in things and appearing where she appears in Serpent's Pass. Cover her between Serpent's Pass and Appa's Lost Days. And then probably most interesting of all is covering Azula as she's captured and then brought to the Boiling Rock. I think you could tell an interesting sort of like prison story of just, Sookie's obviously been in the Boiling Rock for a little bit. What was that like, those early days? And, did she get up to any kind of mischief on her own or anything like that before everyone else arrived to help her, of course? But you still have the same stuff of, like, post-comics. You could just decide to incorporate her in wherever. In that, if you are focusing more on the Kyoshi Warriors, like, you allow Ty Lee to play a role in the story as well, because they're both, part of the Kyoshi Warriors, and that would be pretty cool. Like, Sookie, like, training Ty Lee as a Kyoshi Warrior, and then her getting the chi blocking training would be a kind of nice, fill-in story to get also. So, I think that's what ultimately, to me, makes the most sense. So just to sort of recap everything, to me, Sookie feels the most obvious because she is a member of Team Avatar, and it would fit well with Katara and Toph being the other two one-shots, and it would be this really important thing for, I suppose, just us as fans to see them acknowledge Sookie enough to, get the cover of a book. That would be really nice. Like, of course, she's on the cover for Shells, the free comic, but a book where, they have to do marketing to sell would be really cool to see. And of course, it would sell because everyone does ultimately like Sookie. And if you have her in her Kyoshi Warrior outfit, that's the design that really stands out with her as the leader of the Kyoshi Warriors. That definitely works. So that she's got that going for her, and then because she is, I suppose, in a way, the newest, member of Team Avatar to a degree, she also has the most grounds to tell stories with, because she wasn't in the show as much as the other members of Team Avatar. And like I said, there's all those gaps of, like, if you want to set it during the show, you've got gaps in book 1, book 2, and book 3 to tell stuff with her. Plus the gaps in between seasons, and then in the middle of the comics and so on, because she doesn't appear in every comic, which is kind of interesting. If it's not Sookie, I think it's going to be either May or Ty Lee, and there's probably, I suppose, just as even of a chance as the comic happening for those two. The only thing in those cases would be that, it might make the trio feel a little bit kind of, slightly unbalanced, to be like, okay, you've got your two members of Team Avatar and Ty Lee, kind of an interesting selection. May, I think, fits a little bit more, and of course I think she's, at this point, just a little bit more developed, but that also is a reason to do Ty Lee, to bring her a little bit up some more, and there's probably maybe a little bit more ground to work with her, but either way, I think that those are your main options. So yeah, Sookie, May, Ty Lee. If it's not those three, then it probably has to be Azula, but like, I guess a lighter story with Azula, which will probably end up frustrating people even more, so I think they might just full on stay away from Azula. But yeah, if it's not those, then, like I said, the other ones on my short list, Yue, Kyoshi, Yang Chen, Kana, Ursa, I can't see them going, like, to one of those characters, or any character who's just more minor than that. Like, I can't see them doing, like, Jin or Song or any of these other characters, like, Smellerby. I just really struggle with it, unless they decide to go for, like, one of the more recent comic characters, like Kori Morishita. That's an option, I suppose, but I don't really know if that's necessarily the way to go. I think they'll definitely, just to make the book sell well, it'll have to be one of the basically main-ish characters. And really that is Sookie, Mei Tai Li, and potentially Azula, even though Azula feels kind of off limits. But in the comments in this video, I really want to know, what character do you think will be the third member of the awesome Ladies of Avatar one-shot trilogy that they're doing? We have Katara and the Pirate Silver. We're going to get second book is going to be Toph Beifong's Metal Bending Academy. But what female character do you think will be the focus of the third member of this trilogy? And what are your thoughts on what I had to say about it? But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.